The Very Serious Crafts podcast is on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/seriouscrafts to support our podcast, find out about our Patreon half-stitched episodes, and more.
Hello and welcome to Season 5, Episode 12 of the Very Serious Crafts podcast. I'm Molly from Wild Olive.
And I'm Haley from Red Handled Scissors and the Bones and Bobbins podcast. Today we'll be talking about beading, but not necessarily jewelry.
Yes. We're not making any necklaces today.
No. Although I do keep finding beads in the floorboards of my house. I should start a collection.
You should. I think that would be very cool. Even if they were just a small jar of beads, but it'd be interesting to see what all you find along the way.
I found a lot of handmade straight pins.
Ah. All right.
Because, people's clothes and lace and whatever needed pinning. Apparently. Anyway, before we talk about weird things that are in the cracks of my floorboards, or the thing we're actually talking about, beading, embellishing, that sort of thing, let's give a shout out to our serious friends of the Very Serious Crafts podcast who support us on Patreon. They are the reason that we do this, and so we love them.
Yes.
And if you also want to listen to more of our antics on our Patreon half-stitched episodes, you should do that.
Yeah.
You should join us, because there's, I don't know, an awful lot of them in the back catalog.
There is. And then basically
So
it means when you join at like the friend of the podcast level, it means instead of a new episode every other week, our regular episodes, you get those half-stitched episodes, which means that every week you could get a little bit of Very Serious Crafts. It's true. It's the way to go.
And, I mean, hanging out with us once a week, definitely better than every other week. Yeah. Speaking of which, do you know that it was our 100th full episode last week, I believe?
Was it really? I was thinking we had to be getting close, and I forgot to check. Well, that's exciting.
I only know because when I was putting the link in the podcast, the episode number was on there. And I was like, oh, huh.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. So there are a lot.
There's a lot.
Of back episodes of us being our delightful selves. And also my cats meowing.
Yeah.
It's fun.
Yeah. It's good.
Yeah. Anyway.
So, should we get down to it now?
Yeah. I think so.
This is fun because the topic at hand is really, especially bead embroidery or forms of bead embroidery, or maybe even just sparkly things embroidery. But we talked a few episodes back. The tambour hook or tambour embroidery came up, and in fact, some bead embroidery does use that, but not all does. And so we're just gonna, expand the topic a little bit.
Yeah, so when I was thinking about topics for this episode, I just happened to be sort of idly clicking through random links, and inlay embroidering, just as a phrase, came up. And I was like, well, I know what inlays are in woodworking, and I know what inlays are in a lot of other things, but not necessarily beading or embroidery. And so I went down kind of a rabbit hole of, very 1990s belts.
I was going to say, when you Google it, that's exactly what you get.
Yep. But I was like, Oh, okay. And then that sort of jumped me over into some Art Deco beading. And
Yeah.
then I was in the 20s and 30s where I am happy.
Yeah.
And and I went from there. But it got me thinking about beading that is not necessarily that doesn't give you like a specific compact finished product, but that is just part of an overall larger product.
Yeah.
And then I was thinking about I have a fully beaded dress that is a very 1920s style dress that I wore to the Emmys many years ago.
Hmm.
And it's
Gorgeous.
so
Gorgeous.
heavy and so beautiful. And like someone made those. Like someone did that.
Yeah.
That's not how fabric is made. The beading is completely necessary for the actual dress to be what it is, but it's also like the beading could not stand alone.
Yeah.
I sort of like the idea of skills that sort of live in that in between area where they are truly, truly technical skills, but they don't necessarily get the kind of attention that like the more in your face like jewelry settings
Yeah.
and beaded design like necklaces, jewelry,
Yeah.
decorative pieces
Yeah.
usually get.
I was thinking about this topic, and first of all, one of the things that came to mind is I think it's now been 2 years ago. I purchased a kit from Celia Jaye, and she is a bead embroidery artist, and she makes gorgeous beaded embroidery pieces, and then she sells kits for you to do it yourself. And I still have not made my kit yet, to no one's surprise. Um, but I was thinking about how I don't really do a whole lot of
Jack,
bead
no.
embroidery things.
No, Jack.
Speaking of speaking of cats making noises, but I remembered, actually, some years ago. Let me see if I can actually find the accurate date on this, because it's been a while. 2011, I did an online embroidery course, and I called it All in the Details, and it was like not like super fancy things, but it was about bringing little detail techniques and fun things into your embroidery. And
Oh yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. That's awesome.
yeah, and it was again, so it's 11 years ago, so I don't always remember all of the things that have happened so far back in my life at this stage. But I did some added beads to some of my embroidery. Did some things with sequins, did some things with unusual objects that aren't necessarily even beads. Like I embroidered a pocket watch, and then I attached an actual chain. Like I couched the
Oh, I
chain
love that.
onto the
Yeah.
fabric. So little things like that. And some of those things are actually a lot easier to add to your work than you would think. Like you don't have to even really learn an involved technique to bring some of those things into your work. Like, honestly, my favorite thing to do, I don't always feel like I have the right piece to do this with it, but like adding sequins to your embroidery, because you can literally hold them onto the fabric with a French knot. You
Yeah.
don't have to add a bead to hold it down like you would with other things, but things like that, I love it. But in the midst of then me going down that lane, I remembered a beautiful technique that is shisha embroidery, which is also called mirror work. And I'm sure that you've seen it on Indian embroidery pieces. They're often little mirrors that are held down with stitching around the edges.
Oh. Yeah.
Well, again, it's such a beautiful thing that, there's lots of depth and meaning to it, but also it's just gorgeous. It's also not easy to do. It's not easy to learn. So Shisha embroidery has these little round mirrors, and you like attach them without any kind of glue. It's just thread holding them down around the edges, and you use stitches that in a way almost work like crochet. It feels like you're kind of like crocheting the edges.
I don't think I realized that the stitching itself was holding the mirrors in place. I always figured that there were holes.
Yeah, there are no holes in those mirrors.
Whoa.
Whoa. And once you try it one time, you go, wow. When you see these on things, they are done by skilled artisans. Yeah. And
wow.
You like weave things across it, and then it like all pulls tight. And there's so many ways that it's done. Like there's beautiful extra stitches that get added to them. Sometimes it's done with, when I tried it, I used, the large sequins that don't have holes in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
That get used. Yeah. So you can use those. I also played with using similar techniques and stitching down washers.
Oh yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. But, that's like, I wouldn't think of that necessarily as beading, and yet it falls into a similar realm. And
no, it's exactly the kind of thing that I'm thinking about.
Yeah, and it is such a unique technique that people are just very, very highly skilled when they make those pieces.
Well, now I'm, of course, looking through photos of them, and just how cool. And they do look like embroidery, but embroidery, like knitting, is also just a form of weaving strands together into loops. And so nobody come for me, knitters or crocheters. I know how to do both. But wow, just the detail and tension needed to keep those, especially because those are usually textiles that move.
Yeah, because it will, they're often added to silks, and yeah, that's some really special embroidery, because it really is, specialized stitches and beautiful sequins or mirrors. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, now it isn't necessarily my aesthetic style, generally speaking.
Exactly.
But I really want to try it.
Which I
just because it looks like so much fun and also so hard to do.
Yeah, and I would say there's a fairly steep learning curve on it. It takes a lot of practice to do that right.
It looks like I would be really terrible at it the first several times.
Yeah, but as you said, like the aesthetic being a little bit different than what you would normally go for is even why I was drawn to trying it with washers, because giving it a more industrial feel was a cool change.
I could see that looking really, really neat in tabbed curtains.
It would look cool, and it would be a nice way to weight it down,
That's what I'm saying.
And the cat would probably want to play as well. It's all good.
Yes, I say as I am literally making batting motions at the cat, who has just fallen back asleep, who had been chewing on everything in my area for the past 20 minutes.
Naturally.
That's cool. I hadn't even thought of that. Like, I guess that's also probably a similar technique that's used for attaching gems.
I would think that would,
because that has historically been a thing for evening gowns, like attaching precious and semi-precious stones.
Yeah, because You
And you wouldn't have wanted to,
you wouldn't drill a
like,
hole through those.
no, and it
Yeah.
would have been on silks, so you wouldn't have used, like, even if you could use adhesive, which, I mean, paste jewelry has existed for a very long
Sure.
time,
Yeah.
but you wouldn't necessarily want to, and it also wouldn't look quite the same if
Yeah.
it didn't also move in response to the fabric. So
Yeah.
I
Well,
wonder.
and it is,
Hmm.
I think, in a way, when you look at the mirror embroidery, it has the embroidery becomes like the setting. Like in the same way
Yeah,
you would set
and
a
that's
stone,
exactly what
it's
I'm
the
thinking.
setting for the mirror or the sequin. And so it would make sense to do that with gems or other things as well.
All right, I am currently looking it up because apparently
Okay.
there seems to be an entire area of setting stones and stone embroidery.
Of course there is. As there's
Cool.
always another like layer of thing that is existing that we need to know about.
Cool.
Now I'm doing the Googles.
Uh-huh.
By the way, speaking of which, when you talked about inlay embroidery, when you search for just inlay embroidery, it gives you some of the wildest cowboy boots I've ever seen.
Uh-huh. Yeah,
So
it's
that's fascinating.
yep, so inlay embroidery and inlay beading were two separate directions that I went down.
Mm-hmm.
Then they're sort of not dissimilar aesthetics, especially if you're looking from the search results of someone located in the US
Yes.
who is the age that I am. Um, I definitely owned a good number of country western inspired beaded
I,
items.
I like that secret side of you. That's
Hmm.
uh
Yeah, I don't generally talk about that a whole lot. Although listeners, you may be amused to know, especially if you have not been listening for a while, because I don't know if I ever mentioned this, but I was hired to do a project for country music television on 1990s country music stars, and there exists out in the world a cross stitch pattern that I did of, was it
yes.
Garth Brooks, Ellen Jackson, Shania Twain, and Reba McEntire. So, should you feel the need to have an entirely different outlook on from whence I came, yeah, I could maybe be talked into adding a link.
We'll vote for that. I think I'm officially voting for that.
Okay. Yeah, there's just so many more options and aesthetics with regards to inlay fill in the blank
Yeah.
than I had previously pictured before
Yeah.
starting to look through these things. Like, there are truly modern looking things. There's Art Deco, Art Nouveau, like really, really cool, classy looking things, and things that I personally think are a little on the tacky side. But also, people love them,
Yeah.
and great.
Yep.
I think that you should. Um,
Well, and
it's
seeing it
really fun to see all of that.
yeah, I was going to say seeing a technique applied to many different styles also shows just how versatile it is. So, I like that.
Yeah, so I think it's really fun that pretty much every era that you can think of has had its own sort of decorative beading and decorative embroidery combinations,
Yeah.
and that pretty much any style that you can think of has a version of that.
I think when we talk about beading in the embroidery context, we do usually think of things that sparkle, maybe have more like seed bead
Hmm.
size of things. We think of formal wear and glitz, but But
Although it's interesting that formal wear that is beaded and other techniques of beading aren't necessarily in the same. Like, me having a beaded t-shirt and me having a beaded evening gown are exactly the same technique.
yes, it's just that,
Just very
yeah,
different feel.
exactly, exactly. But also, you can use the same technique or maybe, a different technique, but to embellish with wooden beads. And it changes
Hmm.
the aesthetic so much, but
So much.
it's still
Like,
kind of the same
it can
thing.
go from very bright and colorful and festive to very earthy, and like you can get kind of witchy
Yeah, there's
with like some, like if you wanted to add, say, twigs into your, like,
yeah.
you can make things feel so different with the same general skill set, and I just think that's really cool.
Yeah. Well, when I was saying that I had done a piece where I added chain, like a real, just a fine piece of jewelry chain, not like fine,
Hmm.
like expensive, like thin. Um, and I used, well, in that case, I probably actually stitched through the little links, but
Yeah.
like couching stitch, if you're familiar with embroidery, is basically a way of stitching and holding down another piece of thread or yarn or ribbon, but you can apply it to other
Or stick.
things, or a stick. Exactly, that is the thing, you can hold down other
Hmm.
kinds of things. I did a thing where I stitched a Peter Pan cap, like a little hat, and I stitched on an actual feather. So you can add those pieces. Probably the weirdest thing that I stitched, okay, we could also say, like, adding buttons into your embroidery is kind of like a similar feeling to, adding
Hmm.
sequins or beads. But probably the weirdest thing that I ever stitched onto a piece of my embroidery is, when you were a kid or maybe an adult, did you ever collect the little, they're considered like eraser puzzles, where it's like a food item and it's an eraser, but it also has several pieces that you can like take apart.
Oh yeah, yeah,
They're
yeah.
like, there's a whole line of like
The
Japanese
things that
made.
you would get at book fairs.
Yeah. And like Kinokuniya bookstore has like
Yeah.
a whole big range of them. And there's like little cakes, and of course I have several hamsters, um a burger, etc. Well, I had one that was a donut, and I took it apart and I took the frosting piece of eraser from the donut and I stitched it onto a piece of embroidery, so that, and then I stitched through it, because eraser is soft enough you can stitch through an eraser. And so I stitched
Hmm.
through it to make sprinkles. And so I had this like three-dimensional eraser piece in my embroidery that I'd also stitched through. So it
Oh,
like
that's fun.
added
I've
like this.
done cork.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
That would be a very cool thing to do with it.
it's really crumbly.
Yeah.
It's very, very fussy.
Yeah. Well, and I have embroidered like on a thin piece of cork, like a coaster, and
Mm.
then DMC made stitchable cork. I don't know if they still make it, but it's like
I
very
have no
thin,
idea.
like thin enough that you can actually put in an embroidery hoop. It's thin and flexible enough.
Oh wow,
And
interesting.
and I own a roll of it, but I don't think I've ever actually stitched with it. But yeah, I mean, depending on the type of cork and the size of it and all of that, it could be crumbly. But now we're not even talking about beads, but they can take the place of those
Yeah, and
pieces.
polymer clay.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
you can go from fine art to folk art to found art.
Mm-hmm.
And like, this wasn't even the direction that I necessarily thought we were going to go in, but it's the right direction, clearly, because there's just so much there.
Yeah. Yeah. And the range of things and like ways that you, and I, the ways that you can use it at different skill levels too, I think is really
Yeah.
cool. That you can start out and just try it and throw something in there, and then, or you can become honestly. Well, we talked about this when we talked about the tambour hook. Watching a video of that happening where someone is adding beads by hand with that method
Mhm.
is it's
It's
satisfying
amazing.
and mind melting.
It's, yeah, watching anyone that skilled
Mm-hmm.
doing something so intricate looking and so fast. Like, I don't know, it's just very satisfying.
Well, I think like um Celia J. She her kits are very beginner friendly, but then she also will share videos of her making her fine art pieces where she like builds up the beads and it's dimensional, and she does portraits and more abstract pieces. And
That's
the
cool.
fact that you can get a beginner kit from her and she shows you how to get started, and you see her expert skill level at doing that, that's beautiful. Like that, you really get a sense of the progression of where you can start but also where you can go with the very same technique.
Yeah, I love that. And I like, this is one of the few times that I actually like watching videos,
Yes.
is when I'm talking, or when I'm going down a rabbit hole of the same technique done in different styles by different experts.
Yeah.
Like, it's so satisfying to watch.
Yeah. I also just recently saw, if you just like seeing pretty pictures of beautiful things, I just encountered someone on Instagram. Her name is Helene Lebar. Helene
Hmm.
Leber. Um, and I first saw her. She has a book of like floral cross stitch letters
Hmm.
that are beautiful. And but then in her Instagram, she shows a lot of pieces that she does with embroidery and beads and sequins. And they're just, it's that little extra something, like where you didn't have to add the beads and the sequins in, but it makes it even more special because it's there. And I am not always a sparkly person. I like,
No, I'm not always a fan of beaded embellishment
yeah,
broadly.
yeah,
But I'm looking through her stuff and it's just, well, it almost literally looks like frosting. Like in the
yeah,
most beautiful, um, like sugar crystals
yeah. And
almost.
it's like the thing that gives it the finishing touch.
Yeah, it's nice to see versions of this kind of work that challenge my general snobbiness about it, because,
Yeah.
like, my opinion has nothing to do with the actual reality of the skill. It's just what I saw in the Midwest in the 90s and didn't like.
Yeah, I think that's
But the,
exactly it. You
yeah, the actual true skill and like the breadth of historic examples really completely proves me wrong.
Yeah, I think it's
And I love that.
because you are so used to seeing a thing that this, like, the new version is the unexpected thing. And you're like, wait a minute.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I really appreciate that as well because there's an embroidery artist that I follow, and she is. She's a classically trained embroidery artist,
Mm-hmm.
if you will, and I really respect what she does. Her work is exquisite. It's also just not, it's just not my style at all, and I would never make the
Sure.
thing that she makes. And a lot of times it is like with real gold threads, and
Right.
the extra embellishment where, and part of it is because it's I appreciate, I especially love things that have a more modern feeling to them, and they are very traditional pieces that she makes, and that's fine and still like worth taking in and learning from. So yeah,
Oh,
it's
yeah.
just,
Absolutely.
but also I will say I own one of the, do you remember DMC released, like, for their anniversary they had gold skeins of embroidery floss.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so they sent me one of those as a gift for being part of their family of DMC designers. And it comes in this giant box because it's like a commemorative skein of embroidery floss. And
Oh yeah, I've seen them
uh-huh.
exist. I
Yes.
don't have one,
I
but I've seen them
I don't
exist.
know what to do with it because I it's not the thing
Have
that
you encountered the historic pastime that is called drizzling?
Oh yes, we talked
Oh
about
wait, we
this.
did this
Yeah.
on here. I was
We
thinking
did.
we did it on Bones and
No,
Bobbins.
we did talk
Um,
about this here. Yeah. But see, it's already been drizzled. Faux shizzled. It faux shizzled drizzled. So now it's just a skein of gold embroidery floss. Yeah. If this is all an absolute mystery to you, look back in our archives for drizzling. It was probably
yeah, I completely forgot that it was
2 to 3 years ago.
Serious Crafts
Probably
and
season.
not Bones and Bobbins.
Yeah, I was gonna guess it's in season 3, but anyway,
I think that's right.
yeah, but so yeah, I've got this gold embroidery floss in a very fancy box, and I should probably do some
Sometimes
bead
you just
embroidery.
need a treasure.
Yeah, but really,
You're asking the wrong person. Um, I recommend that you put it in an antique secretary.
there you go. And someday someone will find it and go, "What's this?"
Ooh, neat. And they will put it in their own
There you go.
antique secretary. And that's just how that.
It's like the circle of life for craft supplies.
Although I do think that you could use it in some classy, perhaps pearl related embroidery aspects. Perhaps in an all white situation, if you were doing another, say, wedding piece or baby piece.
Yes, it definitely it screams heirloom embroidery. Yeah.
What I'm saying.
Um,
Ooh, I know what you should
but
do
with the
it.
pearl, I really like the pearl idea. Anyway, go ahead.
You know the tradition of embroidering, or maybe you don't, because I didn't, embroidering the name of the baby and the year on heirloom baptismal dresses on the inside of the hem.
Oh, for like all of the people who have worn it. That's a cool idea.
There's my thought.
There it is. There it is.
There we go.
It's like also really a nice juxtaposition with the like baby animal cross stitch baby announcements that I have in my book, right? Like it's so opposite and yet the same concept.
I mean, it's very lovely.
It is. And it would be perfect for that kind of thing.
Yeah, if you're going to have a fancy thing.
Yes.
You may as well really go all in on the fancy thing.
All right, so
that is my thought.
I will save it for when there needs to be a fancy bead or pearl embroidery occasion.
All right.
I have no idea when that will be, but or if that will be. Surely there will be some need for fancy bead or pearl embroidery.
Ooh, I have many, many ideas all of a sudden for exactly that.
All right. Well, if you need some real gold embroidery floss, let me know.
It's just too much.
Part of me wants to just like snip some off and try it to see how it compares with DMC's regular metallic embroidery floss. It's got to be better, right?
I hope so. Because metallic embroidery floss is the worst.
Yeah, it's nightmare material. Can you imagine pairing that with beading? Ugh.
No. I mean, yes, and that's the problem.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh, yikes.
Yeah.
Wow. Oh, hey, you can still buy the gold anniversary embroidery floss with fancy box.
I think my impression was that like it was a limited edition, and I think that they maybe overestimated how many people they thought would want to own said embroidery floss. But
now I kind of want to own it, just because I could. But oh well, the DMC UK site thinks that you should do royal embroidery with it.
Obviously.
There are lots of crowns.
I have looked into taking a course or two at the Royal School of Needlework.
I have too.
Yeah.
You know, at some point, we could take a field trip to go visit Katie, and also there are several, obviously Royal School of Needlework, but there's also somewhere in Scotland where you can go learn about tapestries in a castle.
Ooh. Ooh.
Uh-huh.
You know, if enough people became patrons of the podcast, they could just sponsor our trip to do this.
We would tell you all about it. It would be worth it. I promise.
It could be. It could be. Oh my.
Anyway, on that note, perhaps we should veer away from.
We should. We're gonna.
I've got a golden skein of floss.
Yes. I should probably pull out the kit though that I have and finally do something with it, right?
I would like to see what you do.
I can tell you it's not going to happen in the next 3 weeks.
I wonder why.
Just a little busy over here behind the scenes, but you know, it's fine. It's fine.
It will be fine.
It will be fine. There's much stitching, but all will be revealed.
It will be. I'm gonna wrap this up. So
it's for the best.
Thanks. Yeah. Thanks for listening to the Very Serious Crafts podcast as we talk about unnecessarily fancy embroidery floss and also amazing things. But I think those are overlapping categories.
Exactly.
But not necessarily. They're not mutually exclusive.
Yes, that.
Yeah.
Anyway,
you can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Serious Crafts and on Facebook at Very Serious Crafts. You can also find show notes and all things Very Serious Crafts at veryseriouscrafts.com, which I just recently updated, so you should be able to find things a little more easily.
Yay!
Just saying.
Always helpful.
And finally, if you are a fan of the Very Serious Crafts podcast, please leave us a 5-star review on whichever platform you use to listen to podcasts, because good ratings help us show up in recommendations, which helps more people who love crafting find us.
The end.
And done.
Oh,
bye, everyone.
Bye.